This is the beginning of part A of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel being broadcast on the internet, only on the internet, not on satellite and not on terrestrial platforms. And the KhoodeelaarTV television channel is broadcast as record that stands online for reference by anyone seeking evidence. And this contains world exclusive, literally meaning world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. Fleet Street also being known, aka Fleet Street, aka also known as, misleadingly, but it is a phrase that is used of the British newspapers, national newspapers. These are neither. These are propaganda platforms and modes for propaganda used by the likes of Rupert Murdoch and other controllers of the printing media that collectively is referred to as Fleet Street, because historically the majority of the titles that are called Fleet Street used to be print published from addresses in the street called Fleet Street, which is situated partly in the city of London and between the Strand and the Anglican St. Paul's Cathedral, based in East Central London. Now, what am I looking at here? I'm looking at the genetically and congenitally corrupt Daily Mail's Saturday weekend magazine. And it is featuring on the front page the man that was in effect referred to as Gordon Brown's kind of deputy when Brown was for just about 3 years incumbent in the post of Prime Minister. Now, this is a series that the Daily Mail is publishing based on Ed Miliband's latest book, and they introduce him as follows. Throughout his time in Westminster, Ed Balls, not Miliband, this is the kind of easiest kind of mistake, but his name is Ed Balls, who was head chef at home. So he was head chef at home. Now he's merged his two passions in a new book of recipes, spiced with tales from the corridors of power. And this piece of promotion is by Francis Hardy. Francis looks like the spelling is a female spelling, or feminist or feminine version of the Francis. So it's Francis Hardy. So they've got 4 pages, 4, 5, 6, 7. At least up to page 7. And why am I holding this? Quite apart from the general evidential use as a piece of evidence of the corruption, criminality, racism, and denial contained in Fleet Street papers and magazines and supplements. The reason I'm holding this one at this moment in this edition is because of the reference to, absolutely disgraceful reference to, a thing, a name, a word that is contaminated by the lying trips to a place in East London by Baris, the congenital liar Johnson, who was at the time in publicly paid post of the corrupt post of mayor at the expense of London. It's Shoreditch. Now, Ed Balls refers to Shoreditch in his commercial corrupt latest book, where in Shoreditch, that is, he booked an event at a restaurant. Now, the reason I'm saying about Shoreditch is this. Shoreditch is also the location that is kind of referred to in the promotion of the Tower Hamlets Council's crooked venture, which we called Rich Mess Center, which is situated in the Bethnal Green Road and is partly misdescribed as being in Shoreditch. I mean, Shoreditch is, of course, the sewer. I call it the sewer ditch. And historically, doing the research, I find that my instinct in calling it sewer ditch is actually factually justifiable because it is based on a sewer. Historically, the ditch, sewer ditch, Shoreditch. I was impelled to do the research in order to find out something about the place, the land, the piece of land, after a number of criminal racists sitting as county court judges in the sewer ditch county court, misbehaved, serially misbehaved in a way that warranted my going beyond the published spiel promoting the legal system. And I found that sewer ditch actually is based on a sewer, a ditch. So it's not only historically, literally, a place in the sewer, but currently, contemporaneously, all the political sewers appear to arrive somewhere they call Shoreditch. And of course, Baris Johnson was meeting Jennifer Arcuri in sewer ditch, and Arcuri herself has admitted that she had a flat in sewer ditch. Although it was a flat, it wasn't anything like the flats that the people deprived of housing and on the overcrowded kind of places in Tower Hamlets can imagine to be housed in. Jennifer Arcuri's flat in Shoreditch was equipped with the necessary vault around which she could perform a specially organized demonstration of her skills. For the pervert, Baris Johnson, who was lying to his family, to his wife, to everyone else, as he was having the kind of meetings with Jennifer Arcuri. By now, of course, Arcuri is so completely satisfied with her findings that Johnson is absolutely an outrageous scandal, that she has issued public condemnation of Johnson, as has Petronella Wyatt. Petronella Wyatt was the one that was, quote, employed by the Spectator, where Johnson, in the post of editor, within quotation marks, made her pregnant. And Johnson was, of course, at the same time married with Marina Wheeler, the licensed law trader, now a QC, with whom Johnson had 4 children at least. So Shoreditch is not known for revolutions, except if revolutions are used in the context and the style of Jennifer Arcuri's performances. Shoreditch is not known for revolutions. Shoreditch is not associated with any social revolution, any campaign for justice, for society as a whole, really, any sustained, genuine campaign for the defense of ordinary people's rights and livelihoods and lives. The so-called kind of campaign against the corrupt use of the Bishopsgate goods yard was never intended to be a sustained defense of the East End of London. All of these are factually fact-checkable, because unlike the Khoodeelaar campaign, after which this program is named, Khoodeelaar Television Channel, all these campaigners, so-called, almost always, predominantly, at least those who control the campaigns, are, quote, indigenous people of white ethnicity or ethnicities. And as the evidence shows, and as I have pointed out yesterday as well, this island, the Little England, is based on an island, has not been kind of occupied or invaded for centuries by people from the mainlands. And I refer to that in the context of the regular kind of item on the menu of brainwashing the zombies, currently linked with the so-called asylum seekers and migrants crossing to southern England from the other side of the channel in France. That is what it is based on. The psychosis, the psyche, the mentality, the mindset of generations of people in Little England is or are based on the fear that this island is going to be invaded. Now, this is something that is historically correct in many respects, because when the Romans came and the Vikings came and the other people came, they were the stronger in terms of the motivation, in terms of the kind of specific aims on their part, on the part of the invaders, and the lack of resistance and the lack of organization on the part of the indigenous natives at the time. The invaders were well organized, and in terms of intellect and discipline and strategy were superior to the indigenous people. Now, this is something that would not be the equation, familiar equation, when looked at by the people of the, say, subcontinent or parts of Africa, where for 500 years successive invasions have taken place of their countries, those countries in subcontinent of Asia, that is now Bangladesh and India and Pakistan, and parts of Africa, countries, almost all of Africa. They have been invaded by people from England, mainly, aided and abetted by Scots, Welsh, and a small number of people in Cornwall. And of course, significant numbers of people from Ireland, both islands, geographically speaking, not politically speaking. And so therefore, the references to places like Shoreditch are misleading by definition and by evidence. Because a place like Shoreditch doesn't really ring the bell, does it? When you have that ordinary conversation in the rest of East London, Shoreditch doesn't feature as a symbol or as a signature or as a exemplar. Shoreditch is like in the creepy kind of sidelines, in the shadows of your consciousness. Shoreditch doesn't actually represent the political, the social, the ethical, the moral, intellectual uprising against the, quote, ruling class. All of these phrases are misleading, because whenever Fleet Street or the media or the kind of cultural platforms, whatever, however many or however small number of that exist in reality, whenever they refer to things like class war, like currently in the last few days, there have been references in the media to Margaret Thatcher and her treatment of the people involved in the mines, coal mines, and the fact that Baris Johnson has been caught making a series of stupid remarks about the behavior by Thatcher in attacking the mines and closing down the mines, and Boris, in another display of his stupidity, comparing that to an early series of government action to tackle climate change, which it wasn't. It never could have been. Thatcher would not have done anything to help the planet, help the environment. It would go absolutely against everything she actually, quote, believed in. Thatcher, of course, is known as the witch. When she died, there are people, not everywhere, but a number of people were reportedly celebrating her death and were saying, chanting, dancing, the witch is dead. The reason why she was so despised was not because she had any understanding of the planet or the climate or anything. She was genuinely somebody who believed in and did everything to enhance the motto that greed is good. Another thing that Johnson has been boasting about, when he's negligently and intentionally aware of people being destroyed, people's lives being destroyed by being treated and cheated by those who believed in greed is good. I mean, this weekend's evidence in terms of Boris Johnson being a believer in cruelty and good is good and cruelty is good is, of course, evident in the death sentence that hangs on the 8-year-old or 9-year-old animal, Geronimo, who is living with his human mom, Helen, in Gloucestershire. Now, the very short kind of statement at this point of this program is that everything that Johnson has said against Geronimo is factually untrue, because Geronimo did not test positive about whatever disease they were looking to find in him. He was induced. Geronimo was induced by the department to have that reaction. Think about that. If you want to know the details, there is a Facebook page called Geronimo, and you can check with Helen MacDonald, who is the owner. And Helen MacDonald is herself a qualified person about animals. She is a vet, 50-year-old, and she knows about vets and she knows about animals and veterinary health and everything 1,000 times more than George Eustace, the idiot in post of the department, DEFRA, who just put the death sentence on Geronimo. And of course, Boris Johnson. No amount of familiarity with classic Greek will alter the truth that Boris Johnson is a liar even when he is doing it in Greek. The fact that he can read classic Greek doesn't make him a teller of the truth. That's the whole point. And he has completely wrongly and untruthfully and dishonestly dismissed the concerns about Geronimo's rights and life and innocence. According to Helen, any alpaca, that is the animal genre, if they are carrying and are infected with TB, tuberculosis, they die within months. Now, this animal has been bouncing around in the Gloucestershire farm for 4 years plus, since he allegedly tested positive. Outrageous. And as we said, this is the evidence. This case is also another evidence of the dysfunctioning state of the mainly English legal corruption bureaucracy. Because one of the shortcomings built in in the legal bureaucracy is that the trial judge remains unaudited, uninvestigated, even when there is an appeal against the wrong decision or ruling by the trial judge. The only thing that can happen in an appeal within this corrupt, stupidly outdated, obsolete, corrupt, unfit for purpose legal court system is if there has been an error in law, error of law, whatever. This is complicated for ordinary people, but essentially, this is another lying continuation of the backwardness of the state that was formed hundreds of years ago. This has to go. An appeal has to be based on the evidence. And it is not. And you cannot invent an error of law. And you cannot detect an error of law if, on the facts, in the case concerned, the trial judge was prejudiced, or the trial judge was primed, pumped, prepared to be prejudiced against a particular party. And this is the party that we shall call Geronimo. And there is no sign of any licensed law trading, campaigning politicians coming to the aid of this woman. Why? Because all these licensed law traders are corrupt careerists, opportunists. They don't want to risk losing their licenses by challenging the system of the courts. So where are we now? We are coming from Shoreditch to Geronimo's plight. And Johnson, when he was visiting Shoreditch to take technical lessons in IT lessons from Jennifer Arcuri, can you imagine? He was lying to his staff or the office of the mayor, and he was distorting the records, and he was kind of violating the rules because he would not be allowed to visit Jennifer Arcuri during paid public hours, and most certainly would not be allowed to do that without declaring that. And everyone knows, and you can check the online archives on Jennifer Arcuri by checking Arcuri, Johnson, and all the rest of it. The main period during which these wrongdoings took place, wrongdoings by Johnson took place, mainly between 2012 and 2016, which coincided with the second 4-year term over which the congenital liar Johnson held office at the expense of the democratic rights of people in London. It's a corrupt post created by Tony Blair. So when Ed Balls is promoted by the Daily Mail Group, did he discuss the plight of the many around Shoreditch, the Shoreditch restaurant? He most certainly didn't. Because reading that thing again, let's read that thing again, where he refers to Shoreditch. And he has been referring to Shoreditch quite a few times over the last many years. So let's see what he says about Shoreditch. So it says Ed Balls turned 50 in February 2017, the year after he did Strictly. And he and Yvette, his wife, threw a party at the Ace Hotel in London's Shoreditch. And then the next paragraph says, it's tantalizing to imagine the mix of guests. A Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, Sir John Cunliffe, rubbing shoulders with Strictly's Tess and Claudia. Dancer Janet Manrara chatting to Evergrande Peter Manderson. Did the two worlds mingle? I couldn't tell you. It's all a blur, laughs Ed. But Katia and I did a demonstration of Gangnam, which is always popular at parties. He reveals too that his old boss Gordon Brown thought doing Strictly was a mistake. He told me so, but then having watched through his fingers for a few weeks, he rang and said, Ed, I was wrong. He enjoyed it. And in the end, he was sending me messages about my paso doble and apparently about his gravy on Celebrity Best Home Cook. The gravy. Ed's rich dark gravy is favorite at home. Now, all of these, what do they show? They show a contempt. The contempt to the narrative about politics, because the reason why Balls is being given this kind of parade by the arch right-wing, arch Labour Party, arch Labour ideology, Daily Mail, only because he does not challenge them. He facilitates them, aids and abets them, their culture and their actual agenda and narrative and their purpose. Worst of all, there is no mention of society. There is no mention of the many. Regardless of whether Ed Balls is against Jeremy Corbyn or the so-called left that Corbyn is identified with, the many as a slogan was introduced while Corbyn was imposed as leader of the Labour Party. And regardless of the fact that Corbyn is otherwise unfit for purpose because of his intellectual deficit and shortcomings, that particular slogan, the many, not for the few, but the many, is absolutely factually correct and is something that needs to be implemented by a political party. Well, the Labour Party is politically dead, murdered by Keir Starmer currently, but if a political party ever were to really challenge and sustainably challenge the Conservatives, it had to be somewhere based on the ideology that politics has to be for the many, as defined in the current narrative. So in Shoreditch, he was not meeting any of the many. Ed Balls was not meeting any of the many, nor had Baris Johnson been meeting any of the many. So these people, Balls was for too long involved in Labour Party politics as an MP. And Balls doesn't belong to the many. And Johnson remains very much part of the few. And he has nothing but contempt for the many. And yet they go to Shoreditch. And yet Shoreditch is mentioned as part of the East End. And the narrative in Fleet Street and by Fleet Street about East End is that it is the place of the many. Nothing could be further from the truth. Because by invoking the word Shoreditch and mentioning Shoreditch in tandem with the East End of London, they're committing multiplicity of crimes, political crimes, historic crimes, factual crimes, because they are showing contempt not only for the contemporary many people in their lives and lifestyles, and they're being denied and deprived, but they're symbolically also perpetuating the justification that they can do that without being held to account, that they can go to Shoreditch, they can go to Brick Lane. I mean, the ultimate symbolic kind of provider of service to the class, to the upper class, to the few, by supposed representatives of the many. And these representatives, when it is Brick Lane that they mention, are of course not only the many among the ordinary indigenous demography, but these many come from the many of the subcontinent of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. This is the phrase Brick Lane is the one that this campaign, Khoodeelaar campaign, is very much part of the action to defend, because of that background, because of that mix. So we say that the only time that a quote Labour political figure is given a positive promotion by the Daily Mail, which started a war against Ed Miliband, accusing Ed Miliband of being the son of a traitor to Britain, is when the likes of Ed Miliband are kind of shown two fingers by the Daily Mail, celebrating Ed balls. And Shoreditch brings Baris Johnson and Ed balls together. Of course, Ed Miliband did visit the area, same area, Brick Lane, near Shoreditch, but he would not be given anything like the kind of endorsement that the Daily Mail is giving to Ed balls. I mean, our campaign is on the record as having condemned Ed Miliband and his brother David Miliband as being too racist and too stupid in the overall context of being in posts in the Labour Party. On the facts. Because, for example, when Ed Miliband was on BBC Live broadcasting his kind of candidature for Labour Party leadership from a location in Wandsworth. Remember, Ed Miliband had Sadiq Khan as his campaign manager. We posted live tweets at the time condemning Ed Miliband on the evidence of his racist speech about migrants. And I don't think that any of the Labour Party parliamentary kind of quote leaders or leading post holders in the UK Parliament, any of the Labour Party leading post holders in the UK Parliament has made, and this is the date and kind of context, contemporary context, and we shall come to the contemporary context as an updater later. No member of the Labour Party in the House of Commons and no Labour Party post holder in the House of Peers has made any statement against racism, against imperialism, against empire, against the successive, that is, series of British imperialist positions anywhere in Africa or in Asia. And the otherwise ethnicity linked differences between people of Chinese kind of ethnicities and people of Asian subcontinental ethnicities, like the subcontinental countries of Asia, Asian subcontinent, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India. Despite the fact that there are ethnicities linked differences, the experience of this Chinese woman or Chinese origin Taiwanese woman, who is a professor of the faculty of law, dean of the faculty of law at the University of Oxford. The fact that she has had to come out in public condemning the frequent accosting that she suffers from porters in the University of Oxford who ask her to identify who she is. This is something that has been happening at the University of Cambridge as well, with the Indian professor Priyambada Gopal. In one of her many kind of condemnations of racism at Cambridge, Priyambada Gopal has been referring to too many occasions when she has been stopped by porters asking her to identify who she is and so on. So when Tony Sewers, connected with the Vice newspaper, was commissioned by Baris Johnson's Pakistani origin stooge called Mirza to do this, literally the whitewash, that there is no institutional racism in Britain. How wrong could they be? And it wasn't an accidental mistake by Munira Mirza. It was an intentional denial of racism that Baris Johnson wanted to effect, which project, which agenda, which purpose, which racist purpose Munira Mirza went into full collusion with. And she recruited Tony Sewers from the Vice. Tony Sewers pigmentationally looks very black. So therefore, when he appears in photographs, the first kind of subconscious impact is that he is black. And that could not be more misleading, because he is black-skinned like Trevor Terrible Pealeves, but he is even more racist and anti-black than the ordinary average indigenous racists are, which works a magic. And this is the transfer of the subliminal kind of impression, with Ed Balls being featured in the Daily Mail, and as part of the promotion, Ed Balls being described as having held a party in a hotel in Shoreditch. And it would be the same thing if the party were held in Brick Lane. Why? Because the only representation that the many would have at a party like that would be as people serving as waiters and as other providers of the service, not as participants around the tables. And so therefore, when the so-called, what's his name? John McDonnell. When McDonnell is given the platform by the Fleet Street newspapers without questioning him to give a certificate for Afsana Begum and saying that if he had the chance politically, he would have given her a job as a minister in the treasury. Now, Afsana Begum is only a 31-year-old person, and she has not demonstrated any abilities that could be said to be sufficient to run a government department or be a minister. Quite apart from that, her trial on charges about housing fraud had nothing to do with the fact that she was one of the likely kind of awardees of preferment by Johnson, and it's nothing to do with the evidence. So why did McDonnell agree to issue that statement? And why did Fleet Street repeat that without any question? There had to be an agenda. And the agenda is that by sparing Afsana Begum and a conviction, the jurors and the whole charade of the trial spared Keir Starmer a serious challenge. We have said this before, and I have just said it again. Because even though the prosecution was very weak, there was enough evidence, as published, put in the trial against Afsana Begum to at least warrant a fuller and further investigation as to the facts and as to her denials and as to the connections between the prosecution and the denial. Why? Because housing fraud is violating thousands of people, individuals as well as families, in Tower Hamlets and in other parts. And it's not something that can be left to the decision, to the prejudices of what appears to be a groomed judge. And the groomed judge's grooming became clear when he gave a direction. Not just the direction about the verdict, the number of people, the majority of the jurors. He gave various directions. And it raises questions as to the competence of the trial. And I leave it there for the time being, and this covers everything. And this is by no means the definitive concluding statement about the trial, except to say again that it was not a coincidence that Private Lie, published before the trial a political comment about the trial, because it said that if Afsana Begum got convicted, then it would almost likely lead to a by-election for the seat, Poplar and Limehouse, parliamentary seat of Poplar and Limehouse. And if a by-election took place, then that would represent an alarming challenge for the leadership of Keir Starmer. I would say that was interfering with the trial in advance by the private eye, and private eye is very well connected with the establishment. So one part of the establishment in the UK is very keen to see Starmer replaced Boris Johnson. And it is that part that got the word around. And private eye was included among those who were briefed on behalf of Keir Starmer. So it remains to be found out, investigated, as to what happened with the choice of the jurors and the choice of the judge doing the trial. Because all the evidence, published evidence, shows that Fleet Street was very sympathetic with Shamima Begum. It's more than a serious evidence that the media, Fleet Street, was kind of used or exploited or got hold of. There was no question. There was no question about the thousands of people being victimized by the corruption, housing corruption in Tower Hamlets. There has been no question. This is the second weekend after the conclusion of the staged trial of Shamima Begum. So those who are watching this program, this edition, for the first time about Tower Hamlets, let's recap briefly. Tower Hamlets is one of the boroughs that were created in April 1965 by merging smaller boroughs that existed in the same boundary. And since Tower Hamlets became active as a local council in April 1965, it has been mainly controlled by groups called the Labour Group, mainly Labour Group. And the controlling group, Labour Group, as well as the two-term group SDP Liberal from 86 to 94, all the controlling groups in Tower Hamlets Council have aided and abetted and practiced corruption over housing. Well, I feature as the definitive campaigner against Tower Hamlets Council corruption. I've been doing it for a very long time. And I was the one who pointed my finger at Paul Beasley in July 1978 at a meeting held in the Montefiore Center. And I openly called him a racist. That was months after Altabali's murder, of course. But I did do what I did based on the evidence of the corruption, housing corruption by Tower Hamlets Council, and housing racist corruption by Tower Hamlets Council. Nobody has done that. And one of the people who were present at the meeting long after the event, remembered what I did and the impact of it. He said that electric shockwave went through the meeting, which it must have done. But that was not the only time that I've done this. And it is always left to me to do what I did in July 1978, calling out Paul Beasley as the racist, as the main racist in East London. Why was it such a shocking event? Because at the same time, contemporaneously, Beasley was feting, quote, ethnic youth leaders from the Bangladeshi community. He was even taking them on trips on helicopters. So he was stooging them, he was making them stooges. Whereas I was calling him the racist in the East End. And the reason was housing racism, housing corruption, and housing discrimination as well. So fast forward to the period of, let's say, 2003 to 2010. During those years, Tower Hamlets, being controlled by Labour Party, Tower Hamlets Council being controlled by Labour Party, was manipulated into losing thousands of council house stock. And the manipulator came from DEFRA at that time, John Prescott, who was the first Secretary of State, in effect, put in place by Tony Blair at the beginning of the century. Now, the DEFRA is in the news, remember, about the death sentence on the alpaca, Geronimo. But this is more than 15 years after John Prescott inflicted a demand from the central government on Tower Hamlets Council, which was pliant, which was complying because it was a Labour-controlled council, to get rid of the thousands of council housing stock. No one in their right minds would do that. No one would in their right minds, if they believe, and if they're supposed to believe in the provision of council housing, would be doing that. Yet that is what the Tower Hamlets Council did, and that was something that Jim Fitzpatrick, who is chronologically the predecessor in post as Poplar and Limehouse MP, which post he resigned and he left, thus opening the post which was taken up by Shamima Begum. So housing, literally, council housing stock was literally robbed, looted from Tower Hamlets Council and Tower Hamlets people, the people on the waiting list, on the overcrowded conditions, and homeless people, so on. And none of the prosecution statements against Shamima Begum made by the so-called licensed law trader James Marsland, none of his statements referred to that robbery, because that would have been the main criteria, the impact on the people that deserved housing. That would be the impact statement that should have been made by the prosecuting so-called council against Afsana Begum, so that the impact, the depth, the height, the desperate impact, the effect on homelessness and housing rights of the people on the waiting list would have been come across. It wasn't. It wasn't made. And there were other very serious and similar robbery of housing stock had been going on by Tower Hamlets Council itself. So if the prosecution name made on paper by the council had really wanted to draw attention to the severity of the impact on people of housing fraud done by anyone, then they would have included all these facts. But they didn't. And Fleet Street, by running the story about Labour MP like the Sun did, miss the whole thing, because it wasn't Afsana Begum acting as a Labour MP, because she wasn't an MP at the time for a start. But even if she were an MP, it wasn't the fact that she was a Labour Party MP that should have been under the focus. It should have been the fact that she, on the charges put against her, she abused. They abused her knowledge, abused her facts, and abused a lot of other things. Nothing to do with whether she was an MP or whether she was not an MP. So the prosecution got it absolutely wrong by not pointing that out, and Fleet Street got it even worse by choosing not only to ignore the depth and the predominance and the prevalence of fraud, housing fraud in Tower Hamlets, but even doing a U-turn in political and kind of political antagonism that the Sun, the Daily Mail, the Telegraph usually show to the likes of John McDonnell. Instead of calling him a left-winger with a discreditable record politically, they elevated John McDonnell. They elevated John McDonnell to a level almost similar to that of a saint, a wise person, a source of morality and ethics. Now, McDonnell is a liar. McDonnell never, ever can claim to know Tower Hamlets. If his certificate issued for Afsana Begum is treated as the basis for his claim to know Tower Hamlets, he is a liar. He has no evidence. And I don't even want to I don't have to even refer to his disgraceful role at the GLC, Greater London Council. McDonnell politically is an idiot. He may be personally less or more honest than others, but politically in the context, he is an idiot. McDonnell didn't refer to any of the people in the grassroots who suffered loss of housing options, or loss of options to have their homes, have a home. Because this criminally endorsed Afsana Begum's being a candidate for the post vacated by Jim Fitzpatrick a year earlier or year and a half earlier, by calling her the best representative of the grassroots in Tower Hamlets, in the community. Nothing could be further from the truth. Afsana Begum is not a representative of the grassroots. Never has been. Never will be. Afsana Begum is being pushed, backed by a number of active careerists at various levels. And to this day, Afsana Begum has not provided a statement about what she understands are the facts about Tower Hamlets community, Tower Hamlets grassroots. And Afsana Begum has not most certainly shown any awareness of the fact that thousands of council housing stock were robbed by Popla Harka, given to Popla Harka and the Tower Hamlets community housing. She has not. So this should have been put to her. This should have been put to her by James Marsland, the so-called prosecutor, during the trial. She should have been asked, do you know, or did you, at the time that you were doing the alleged fraud, did you know about or did you care about anyone in the grassroots being deprived and denied of their urgent emergency housing needs? Marsland could have said, your certifier, your endorser, John McDonnell, endorsed you at the time of your candidature for becoming the Labour Party candidate for this parliamentary seat. He said that you, Afsana Begum, were the best grassroots representative of the community in Tower Hamlets in East London. So, who in the grassroots did you care about in terms of their housing desperation and needs? Marsland didn't ask, and I'm sure Marsland didn't have a clue. Because if anyone asked Afsana Begum during the trial those questions, she would have been genuinely forced to weep because she would not have any clue. It is not for McDonnell, the racist criminal patronizer, to abuse his position in the Labour Party to make completely criminally irresponsible, uncaring, stupid, negligent, false statements about anybody. If he considers grassroots to be of any importance, then he should have said what Afsana Begum had done to help the grassroots, the moron. But he didn't. He said he would give her a job as a minister if he got the chance, if he had got the chance. That is absolutely stupid. His being able to give her a job is speculation in the worst possible way, hypothesizing in the most inappropriate way, because there was no way that he could have given that job, because there was no chance in hell that he would have been part of a government, because he was a significant source of the unfitness for government, unfitness for electoral majority that has been blamed on the Corbyn leadership. So it was hypothesis under hypothesis under hypothesis. It has nothing to do with the housing fraud in Tower Hamlets, the housing robbery in Tower Hamlets, all taking place through the Tower Hamlets Council. Not only was the transfer of the housing council housing stock a criminal, unparalleled kind of act of robbery anywhere in Britain, this was made worse by the same regime, the Labour labeled regime in control of Tower Hamlets Council, engaging in a collusion, serial collusion with Channel 4 television in broadcasting not one, not two, not three, 5 separate programs denying liability, denying responsibility, denying duty on housing. This has not been done by any television channel, any mainstream about any London or England borough. Think about that. And James Marsland couldn't have been more unfit or kind of dysfunctionally, more dysfunctionally briefed. Who briefed him? I don't know. And of course, he was hired by the Tower Hamlets Council, who would be the last to admit that they or the council had taken part in these series of housing robbery. So, this prosecution being called housing fraud was a complete false name. It wasn't a prosecution over housing fraud at all. Anyone who is watching this for the first time may like to know that the Khoodeelaar campaign, advocated, presented by myself, has published online and made statements at least 100 times, if not more, against the Channel 4 television program series called How to Get a Council House. And also about the television program featuring then Chief Executive in post in Tower Hamlets Council, Kevan, K-E-V-A-N, Kevan Collins, an accomplished racist liar. He did a program with Channel 4 under the undercover boss, and he too lied about housing in Tower Hamlets, housing by Tower Hamlets Council, because with him appeared the racist criminal liar called Colin Cormack. So anyone who is seriously interested in the actual facts and checking each of the assertions that are made and contained in this program can check, and they will find that I'm only making a shorter statement than the facts warrant. Otherwise, absolutely 100% accurate and unique and world exclusive, because nobody else is doing it. Nobody else would do that. Now, in the statements, after the so-called trial of Shamima Begum was finished, the person that has been described in 2 ways. One is as her ex-partner or as her ex-husband. This person is not related to me because the surname is similar to mine, but he's not in any way related to me. Is called Ehtishamul Haq. In his statement, he doesn't refer to anything to do with any concern about housing corruption and housing fraud in Tower Hamlets Council. Why is it important? Because not only was he mentioned as the fall guy, and one of the main reasons why Afsana Begum claimed that she was being maliciously prosecuted, he is a current councillor. He has become councillor since Afsana Begum's alleged crimes or dishonesty occurred. Not only that, this Ehtishamul Haq, since his election in May 2018, also became Tower Hamlets Council's representative, or one of the representatives, to sit on the board of Tower Hamlets Community Housing. Remember, Tower Hamlets Community Housing, abbreviated to THCH, is one of the crooked organizations, along with Popla Harka, numerically the bigger of the crooks. Tower Hamlets Community Housing is a crooked organization that was given the second largest number of council housing stock by the crooks in control of Tower Hamlets Council politically at the relevant time. Should Ehtishamul Haq not have issued something about what he thought about council housing fraud? Because that was the main headline relating to Afsana Begum's trial for alleged council housing fraud. He should have, shouldn't he? But he didn't. His statement, the last time that we saw it, is a defensive one. He says that he has got, or he hoped he had got, positive relationship with Afsana Begum. Given the extent, given the number of times and the number of allegations Afsana Begum's defense had made during the trial against Ehtishamul Haq, that would be the last thing that he should have issued if he really was bothered about the allegations. He was concerned about the allegations made against him by Afsana Begum, or on behalf of Afsana Begum. First of all, she accused him of domestic kind of violence, of assault, because her defense stated that he controlled her, domestically controlled her, that he drank too much, he was drunk. And that one of his relations, brother-in-law, had actually made the complaint against Afsana Begum, alleging housing fraud. These are very specific allegations against, very specific and very serious allegations made on behalf of or by Afsana Begum in the context of the trial of Afsana Begum, charged with housing fraud, 3 counts of housing fraud. Now, Ehtishamul Haq hasn't mentioned any of these, except to say he denies them. Denial is not enough when the details have been so extensively mentioned, both in the court and both in the coverage by Cliff Street of the so-called trial. And he has not said anything generally about housing fraud. Now, if he knows Tower Hamlets, the community, then he must know the presence among many people in the community who are concerned about the behavior of the council, of the concern that Tower Hamlets Council is a crooked council. The Tower Hamlets Council is not delivering the due service and housing to the community, and so on. But his statement doesn't mention any of those things. We shall come back to all of those in due course, of course. And this Ed Ball's meeting in a restaurant, the expensive restaurant in Shoreditch, is one aspect of the Labour Party establishment being in denial as well, and is being in business partnership with the Daily Mail. Would the Daily Mail have promoted Ed Balls in that way if Balls had said that, look, I mean, Shoreditch is a place which is inside or next to the London Borough of Tower Hamlets Council, which council was manipulated by John Prescott to get rid of the largest number of council housing stock by any council. And that I sympathize, I solidarize, and so on with the people who are the victims of the loss of housing opportunity and option. That word option occurs in the records of the prosecution case allegedly made against Afsana Begum, because this Colin Cormack was co-appearee with the criminal, with co-criminal, who is his co-criminal, Kevin Collins, on the Channel 4 program, Undercover Boss. Colin Cormack was the head of the housing options, this criminal. And the housing options was misrepresented on that program that featured Kevin Collins as the undercover boss. A number of people shown on the program lied, as did Colin Cormack, because the name Colin was used by Colin Caban, or Kevin Collins as his name, in the so-called persona that he and Channel 4 agreed to use on that program. So when Kevin Collins called himself Colin, the real Colin, Colin Cormack, stood literally next to him, inches away from him on the program. That is how brazen is the corruption and criminality by Tower Hamlets Council on public record or records. And if, going back to the liar, John MacDonald, if MacDonald had any care or concerns about the grassroots in Tower Hamlets, he would have said, because he had been alive at the time when Belayar and Prescott imposed and inflicted the robbery of Tower Hamlets Council's housing stock that they put into the control of the crooks called Poplaharka and the crooks called Tower Hamlets Community Housing. There was no sign of MacDonald using the word grassroots again. So MacDonald was a colluder by silence or a colluder after the fact by denial with the program of robbing Tower Hamlets, ordinary people in Tower Hamlets, of housing stock, council housing stock. There has been a change in the kind of access to online resources or online published items. Let's see what the state is when it comes to Channel 4's programs. So according to this search, and the search is Channel 4, how to get a council housing. This is how I am searching. There are, in 49 seconds, 7,920,000 results. Now, all of them may not be about that particular search phrase. But let's see what they are saying at the beginning, at the top. It says, how to get a council house. How do councils cope with the lack of properties and a surplus and it says a surplus of people in need of homes with affordable rent. And they're saying they've got 4. Series 1, episode 4. So there are, and they're connecting these with other items, including Manchester and other places. So this one, it says, this episode follows some of the council officers and families in Tower Hamlets in East London. Each week there are 24,000 people hoping to get one of just 40 properties available. And then the other ones are also about Tower Hamlets. Now, forgetting about Manchester and other places, even if MacDonald had bothered about those people, the number of people, read again, 24,000 people, and the only number available of properties available is 40. So that kind of desperate kind of inequality between the properties available, 24, and the number of people needing 24,000 is extraordinarily beyond kind of comparison. It is very desperate situation. So did MacDonald bother to check even that? Because if he checked even that entry, that introduction, he would not have issued a statement in support of Afsana Begum, the one that he did issue, and he did make available to the jurors. In contrast, if James Marsden allegedly showing concern about the housing fraud had bothered about the evidence, it's not a hypothesis, then he would have put that question during the trial and asked Afsana Begum to explain what she thought about the fact that 24,000 people needed the housing and only 20. Is it 20 or 40? Let's see what the number is. I'm not looking straight. 40 people, 40 properties are available, while 24,000 people are hoping to get one of just 40 properties. What did she think? And anyone going down that route of actually being concerned about the needs of the people and the availability of the properties. And they would have said, somebody would have said that the transfer of thousands of council housing properties did create a serious problem in Tower Hamlets. Nobody did that. Neither the prosecution nor John MacDonald, the so-called Labour Chancellor-to-be, not the council, not the corrupt liar John Biggs, who agreed the statement, idiotic statement that was issued after the so-called conclusion of the trial of Afsana Begum. None of them talked about the actual housing stock, the actual number of people, the actual impact on the lives of every single one who is denied housing rights in Tower Hamlets by Tower Hamlets Council. So this is just after 1.5 hours of this program. In the next ones, we shall be updating on the struggle for the life of Geronimo against and the role of Fleet Street, whether they are anywhere near rigorously exposing the corruption of the Baris Johnson government regime in murdering this perfectly healthy animal and destroying this person, Helen, who has been under harassment and worse from the lies and lying by DEFRA and the government department for the last 4 years.